Hello, this is Julie Samrick, and we have our second political shaping story. We had our first one last week, so go check that out. This week we're talking to Samantha, and she was born in 1972 in Oxford, England, while her father was stationed over there for the U.S. Air Force. She can go into more about that if that's part she wants to. She identifies as a Republican with a smidge of libertarian. She says that she's fiscally conservative, but more socially liberal when it comes to some things. So just a reminder to me of complexities. Some people, ID themselves as a word, and most people, there's a lot behind the one word and the longer description. So I'm so excited, Samantha. Thank you for volunteering. And I usually, first of all, will say, what was your earliest political shaping? What do you remember either being said to you? Did you experience something? But because you were born in Oxford, England, I almost have to ask that first. Like, where were you raised and when did you come to the US? So you jump in wherever you want.
Okay. So we lived in England until I was about four and a half. And then my dad was sent to Vandenberg Air Force Base, which is down near the Lompoc, Santa Maria area of California. And I grew up in a house that politics was a super common discussion all the time. My mom was a Miss Young Republican growing up, and was involved in like local political races, volunteering time. And my dad's father was a Democratic judge in Westchester County, New York, who ran for Attorney General of the state of New York on the Democratic ticket.
Wow.
And then my dad, being the rebel, right, joined the Air Force and definitely shaped him politically in a different way than he was raised. So I grew up in a pretty conservative Catholic household that definitely leaned Republican. And then I watched my parents' views change over time. My parents got divorced and my dad was living on his own.
How old were you, an adult or a child when they
I
got
was an
divorced?
adult. They got divorced while I was in college.
Okay.
And I'm an only child. So they were kind enough to try and wait until they thought that it would not affect me as much. Whether or not that was a good decision, for them remains to be seen. But my dad then suddenly living on his own, realized that maybe he was a little more democratic like his upbringing than he thought. Just that, being a single guy and looking at how to make ends meet post-retirement was a little more challenging. And so it was always a constant discussion in our household. And I definitely challenged him the whole way. But I have a lot of early memories. My grandmother volunteered for George Bush's campaign, and there's a picture of Barbara Bush that's signed to my grandmother floating around somewhere. And at the same time, my dad's mother has this fantastic black and white of her and Eleanor Roosevelt. Wow. So it's just this like fantastic fabric that starts to weave together and form you into like looking at all sides of issues, because there were so many varied views from different people in my, in and around my house growing up.
Were you raised in Santa Maria area?
We left there. My dad was stationed there until about 1980, and then he was sent to Korea for a year. And his follow-on assignment was Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. So my mom and I went to San Antonio without him, and he joined us there after his year in Korea.
Wow.
And we lived there until I was a sophomore, and he retired around 1988, and the economy kind of stunk, to put it politely. And San Antonio wasn't a great place to be job-wise. And so we moved to a small town in Georgia where my mom's parents had retired to.
Wow. So you went to several schools as a child?
Oh yeah. In fact, before middle school, I don't think I was in the same school for more than a year.
Wow.
I
Did you
floated
graduate
around
from
a
high
lot.
school? In Georgia, you graduated high school?
Uh-huh. I graduated from high school in Georgia. I was involved in ROTC, both in San Antonio and in Georgia.
Mhm.
So in Georgia, I was the first female battalion commander in the state of Georgia for Army ROTC, which, was a thing at the time. You know,
Wow.
it's just now just a little, like, checkbox in the past kind of thing. But at the time it was pretty cool. And then I went on to go to a military academy. So very conservative, right? That was a very conservative path. I grew up in a military household. I was involved with junior ROTC in high school, and then I went to a military academy where I was surrounded by mostly conservative views
Gotcha.
and mostly men.
Yes. Well, I
Uh,
was going, and then did you go on? How long were you serving in the
so I
military?
went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, and you do not have to go active duty military when you graduate. You have to work in the maritime industry for 5 years, and you have to maintain a naval reserve spot. But I didn't even get my commission. I got injured when I was out at sea, because you spend a year out at sea, and I got carpal tunnel, which was fine. I'm completely healed. My hand works great. But
Huh.
I had scar tissue in my hand, and they decided they weren't going to give me a commission. It was 1995,
Hmm.
and Clinton was downsizing the military. And I have a friend who ran track, but they decided he had flat feet and couldn't get his commission, even though the guy ran like 5 to 10 miles a day. And
Wow.
so for those of us that didn't get our commission because we were medically disqualified for some reason, we basically got out with this education that the government had paid for. And the only thing we had to do to pay it back was to work in private industry in a job that qualified for the maritime industry. It was a little crazy.
Hmm.
Like, we kind of left, like, what just happened? Like, we were all expecting to do at least 8 years Naval Reserve afterwards, because that's the normal obligation.
Well, and did you
And
have that in your mind? Did you have a plan in place?
I
Was
did.
that
I mean,
hard when things kind of, did you have a vision for your future that was different than what it
I
ended up
did.
being?
I always thought that I would go active duty. I actually thought, I took the LSAT and was considering going active duty and going to law school. And when I realized I couldn't go active duty, and then I realized that all of law school would be on loans, um, I kind of chickened out a little bit. When you get out of school with no debt and you've never even applied for any loans because someone else has paid for it the whole time, you have a very different position on how much debt you're willing to take on. And it scared the ever living bejesus out of me. So
Hmm.
instead, I got a job working for a software company out here in California, um, and amazing company. And they automate container terminals. And I worked there for 12 years until I had my third child, and I just could not juggle anymore.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your service.
I don't really consider it service because
Well, your
I'm
mind
getting
was
under
there. Your
commission.
mind was there, and
Yeah,
you went through the steps, and you went through the academy, and yeah, I think that's really interesting and remarkable.
thanks.
What do you remember as a child? What sort of stories were told to you, or not even stories, but were there things that were said to you at the dinner table that just made you say, okay, I am identifying right now as, more with the Republican Party? Or did you experience, or you alluded to things shaping you while you were in the academy? What sort of kind of color can you add to your shaping, like specific
Well,
things?
I think watching funding change as I was growing up. My dad was involved with security police in the Air Force. And then he was involved with, oh my gosh, civil defense. And there were always a lot of discussions about how, as administrations changed, funding for the military changed, right? And my dad was enlisted. He wasn't an officer. We didn't live a flashy life. We lived in base housing until I think we lived in base housing, I think until maybe I was in seventh grade. Um, so not no fancy house. My mom tried to, sometimes my dad even moonlighted and had a second job,
Mhm.
because, a staff sergeant and a master sergeant in the Air Force don't get paid a ton of money. you know,
Did
especially
your
when you're
mom work
raising a
outside the
family.
home? Did your mom work
She
outside the home?
did. When we were at Vandenberg, she sold mobile homes for a while, and then she also volunteered at the hospital. She didn't get paid for that, but she really enjoyed it. Um, so, I mean, she did, but when they were in England, when they were first married, she wasn't even allowed to work.
Mm.
She wasn't a citizen and she wasn't in the military. So there was nothing that she could legally do, which for her was extremely frustrating.
Right. Well, and moving nowadays, that often, so many jobs you can still do remotely, but probably back then it would have been harder to move every couple years. And if she wanted to have a, a regular job, it might have been hard. So,
Right.
um, what I love your description of your identity, how you say you're a smidge of libertarian. Do you want to talk a little bit about, or some of the issues that you say make you a little more socially liberal? And I also want
So,
to ask, oh, I'll ask this question next. Go ahead.
you know, I feel like the more government we have, the government's never been great at managing a lot of things, right? You know, you take various programs and the government takes them over, and there's always issues and bumps. I mean, you take Social Security as an example, where the government collected this money from citizens and then they borrowed against it, and they still haven't paid back what they borrowed against, you know, and
Do you
then
think
they
the
make
states should be in charge of Social Security, or how would you like to see that handled?
not. That probably wouldn't balance out very well. I mean, similar to why we have the Electoral College, I think that it probably is a federal program. I think that we are probably stuck with it. I just think that we need to do somehow a better job of managing it.
Mm,
There's a lot of fraud out there, and I think we know that, but I think that we haven't figured out how to really get a handle on that. Um, and a lot of it is, I wouldn't even say it's fraud, it's just mistakes that aren't caught.
mm,
You know, when my dad passed away, we continued to receive Social Security checks for 4 months, even though they were notified. And I kept having to return them saying he's gone. It shouldn't take 4 months for them to stop paying that out. So if it took him 4 months for him, how long did it take for, you know, the other tens of thousands of people that might have passed away? And that's money that could have been sitting there providing services to, you know, someone else,
mm,
right?
mm,
So I just feel like we need to do a better job of managing it. And I feel like we need to figure out proper eligibility requirements, um, what those are. It's not for a single person to decide,
mm.
but I do think there are eligibility requirements. Um, so I don't know. I just feel like we could manage it a whole lot better. And so because of that, and because the government is kind of famous for mismanagement. I mean, we see mismanagement in the post office, we see it with Social Security, we see it with the VA. I mean, we see it across the spectrum, right? These giant programs that the government runs, we have issues with. And so for me, that's when it tells me, okay, the government's got its fingers in too many things and it's not doing any of them on a scale of 1 to 10. None of them are hitting a 10. So maybe our fingers should be in a few less pies, and we should perform better and make better pies out of those ones that we're working on, right? So
Yeah.
for me, you know, and I just feel like the government doesn't need to regulate us to death. You know, I mean, we have states passing laws about how much soda you can consume. That's a personal choice. It may be a bad choice, but it's a personal choice,
Mm,
right? So that's the libertarian side.
mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not for the legalization of all drugs or anything like that. I just feel like there's a line at which we shouldn't cross. It's a
Mm.
personal decision, and you may make a bad personal decision, but as long as your personal decision isn't infringing on someone else's rights, then it is what it is, right?
Yes. Interesting.
And in terms of being more socially liberal, it goes to the fact of having people in your life that have fundamentally changed you as a person, from the person you were raised, um, and the beliefs you thought you had, and you meet people that change you forever. And for me, you know, Second Amendment rights, are as important as gay rights. I don't fit in a box.
Mm.
And I say that very strongly because I've had two people in my life that mean a whole lot to me, and one is gone now. One of my best friends at the academy, I was the first person that he told he was gay. And I remember him sitting on my bed crying. Grew up Catholic, felt like he didn't even know what his identity was anymore. He felt like he wasn't allowed to go to church. And one of the kindest, gentlest souls I've ever met.
Mm.
And I was like, there is no way you can convince me that someone like this, who I love dearly, is a bad person, is going to hell, shouldn't deserve every freedom that I have just because of this is how life is. And this is the person that he is. And so I always felt that way. But I was very quiet about it. And I was very to myself about it. I think also being Catholic, it's definitely doesn't necessarily fit in with what the Catholic Church has always taught, right? And the second person who you also know is the head of our dance company.
Oh,
right? And
Samantha and I are friends through, if you want to bring that up, through dance. And I've never heard her whole story before. So when I said anybody passionate about politics who'd like to share, and you said you went like this, and I wish we'd talked more in depth sooner. Go ahead.
so, I mean, so this person that I'm talking about that we both know through dance, getting to know him as he was just getting engaged and going through the process of planning this fantastic wedding and watching the love that these two people have for each other and not even having a care about how it's defined. Like, why does it need to be? And it changed. It was like somebody flipped a switch in how I thought and how I was able to talk about it. I wouldn't necessarily say that I hadn't thought that before because of my friend Jim, but I do honestly think that in getting to know Jake, it made me able to verbalize it. And those two people have changed my life and my perspective and how I will vocalize my feelings about that going forward. And I can tell you, like, so about 2 weeks ago, I don't know if you saw, the Pope was interviewed and he made this statement about how a gay couple is, they're children of God and they deserve all the rights and happiness of everyone else. And why can't we all just embrace that? For me, it was like, oh my gosh, someone's finally said it. And it like meant so much to me personally because of what I felt like it meant for other people that I know. And so, I mean, those are the kind of things that does not fit necessarily with, a, conservative Christian, Republican perspective that people believe the perspective should be. And that's, I think, what I feel strongly about. I think that we have gotten into this habit of putting people into boxes.
Yes, we have.
And
you are touching, I had goosebumps because this is 100% why I wanted to write this book and keep interviewing people. Because once I closed the book, I thought, gosh, that's just 16 stories. There's so many more. And meanwhile, you turn on the TV and we are so one-dimensional. Everybody, regardless of party, people are presented in these one-dimensional ways that I know isn't the truth.
Right.
When you get out and you really talk to people, it's not that way. It's not that way. And you are an example of that. So,
well, and I think that, I don't know if you saw my political post close to the election about, everyone talking about wearing pearls on election day, and how it would, honor Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And it was only posted by women that I know that are more liberal leaning. And I was like, you know what? It's not a She is not, for me, she is not a liberal figure. She is not a conservative figure. She's an amazing woman that all women should celebrate. And if I choose to wear pearls on election day, it doesn't mean that I'm voting a certain way. It means that I want to do honor to someone that broke the mold for what women could do in this country, and who knew how to not judge people for their politics.
Mm-hmm.
She was famous for her friendship with Antonin Scalia.
Mm-hmm.
There are photos of them out at dinner together, just the two of them, laughing because they were such good friends. They never voted the same, I don't think, in their entire records on the Supreme Court. But
Right.
they loved each other as friends. Their families socialized together. And I mean, that's what's missing. How did we lose that?
Yeah. And that's exactly it. Their friendship right there shows that no, we don't all have to be kumbaya and everybody agrees the same and everybody gives up their opinions and nobody, there's no strife or anything, but it just means, can we sit down and talk with one another? Can we have friends, be friends with people that believe differently than we do? That doesn't mean we don't still, believe what we believe.
Right.
Can we still be civil and be friends with our neighbors, just like the two of them? So
there's another fantastic picture that floats around that you've probably seen of George Bush and Michelle Obama. And she's like whispering something to him and he is like cracking up. And they socialized a good bit, those two couples, because they were in close contact at various events together frequently. And I think that photo that I see that always makes me feel good, not only is it black and white, male and female, liberal and conservative, it's like it encompasses the whole thing. It's two human beings just totally enjoying each other's company without anyone having to stick a label on it or talk about why it happened or why it was such a big deal. It was just a great human moment. And I just think it's great because it was actually captured on film. And I think we should celebrate stuff like that more often, and we don't.
Yeah. Do you want to talk at all about the election and your thoughts, and if you want to say any about who you supported, or you can keep it private, whatever you want to say? I think the election right now is still on all of our minds still.
I think it's on everyone's mind. I don't think any decided outcomes are going to change. I do think, I wish we could take opinion out of the media. I think there's a lot of factual stuff that should just be out there for people to make their own decisions without somebody else deciding for them. I was a Trump supporter for policy. I wish and have wished for years that the man would stop tweeting. I wish, part of this is that I think we put our elected officials on pedestals and forget that they're humans, forget they have a past, forget they may not have made mistakes. I mean, and usually we all learn from our mistakes and we move on. That's the goal of being a human being, is to learn what not to do, right? I mean, our mothers smoked and didn't use car seats. And we all don't do that now because we know better, right? We are more well-informed. Right. Things happen and opinions change over time. So I
As
think,
Maya Angelou always said, Oprah always said, she'd say, when you know better, you do better.
Right. And so right. I think calling someone out, anyone out, and I feel this way on both sides of the aisle, about something they said, they did this to Biden too, about something he said 30 years ago. 30 years ago was a different time. 10 years ago was a different time. Yeah. So it is what it is. Your actions now are what should speak for you. But I feel like it's always nice to have someone for your children to aspire to be, for them to set an example that you would like them to aspire to. And the military side of me says, respect the office, no matter who is in it. Plain and simple, right? So I'm going to respect the President of the United States, regardless of who it is. that doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to want my children to aspire to be that person, right? Um, I think there's a lot to be learned from how we look at stuff in hindsight. I mean, everyone talked about JFK, like, because he was assassinated and he was so young and he was so charismatic, and he and Jackie were this amazing couple, and the administration was Camelot, right? But there were women in and out of the back doors of that White House like a revolving door. And nobody talks about that, right? Because there was this view of him, and that's the way it was. And so I think we forget that these men, maybe one day women, are humans. Yeah. They will make mistakes. They will hopefully learn from them. They will hopefully move on and do better. I think that from a fiscal perspective, Trump did a lot of the right things. I think that his emotions got the better of him in many cases, which is a shame.
Do you think that was his sort of, I mean, half the country voted for him, but I was going to say downfall from the other point of view, or people that didn't vote for him? Or
I think for those that didn't vote for him, there are many camps, right? There's a good portion of people that vote that follow a train, right? That are not necessarily informed on the details of issues, but they follow a group, right? And that's just human nature. I think there's a certain portion of voters that didn't vote for him because they were so far in terms of opinion of where he was and where they were. There was no way that would ever happen. And then I think there was this group in the middle. And I think a good portion of the group in the middle couldn't get past his ego and things he said and the way he reacted to people. And they may or may not be happy with policies going forward under a new administration, and they may regret that decision. And I think for me, it was a question of trying to separate out policy versus personality. And there's a lot of people that would question as to whether or not that's the right moral decision, right? But when you're raising a family of 5, there's 5 of you, you own your own business, you pay more than half your income in taxes because of the state that we live in, and small business fees and things like that. You have to look at policy. You have to. It's impossible not to. And so I just feel like it is what it is. I will, support and be hopeful of our new president and pray to God that everything is as good as people imagine it's going to be. I have no idea. None of us has a crystal ball. Yeah. I mean, if 2020 shown us anything, we can't plan for anything.
Right, so, exactly.
Who knows what's waiting around the corner? I mean, you look at poor, and I say this, but you look at George Bush, and I mean, his entire presidency ended up being defined by 9/11, regardless of anything else that he did. And so I think that it just, depends. I think the same thing is true of, a lot of presidency, and it being defined by one thing, and you forget about all the other stuff. And there's a lot of other
Do you think
stuff.
That's fair that Trump will be defined by COVID, or do you think
he will be defined by COVID?
What?
I think he will be defined by COVID. Whether or not that's accurate, I don't know. I feel like there's so much misinformation about COVID. There's so much we don't know. And wading through that is like nearly impossible. And all we can do is try and make the best of it. I am definitely not an anti-masker. I feel like none of us knows whether or not it's truly the best thing. So why is that going to be the hill you're going to die on? Right?
Yeah.
So we're all wrong. Guess what? By being wrong and wearing them, we didn't hurt anybody.
Yeah.
But if we're not wrong and we wear them, maybe we help somebody. So why is that, an argument? And I don't equate it to having a bunch of rights taken away. I don't, it's very different
Hmm.
than if we're going to have a conversation about guns,
Would
right?
you be okay with a national mask mandate?
Um, I think that's a tough call. Um, I think if you look at the numbers right now, depending on what the numbers tell you, based on how many tests we're running, the numbers are definitely up, right? They're up. No one can argue that. It's a fact. And they're up in places, especially where it's starting to get cold and people are inside more often. And so my feeling is, what could it hurt? At
Hmm.
the same time, if you're not going to, at what point, I guess just legally, I'd want to know that he's checked all his boxes in terms of not stepping on states' rights.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at Alaska.
Well, it's interesting because in the beginning you were talking about kind of staying out of someone's business unless it's going
Right.
to infringe. So that must be a teetering point for
It is.
you.
It is. But at the same time, it's a teetering point. But again, like I said, are masks the hill you want to die on?
Mm.
Right? Like I said, very different conversation if we were talking about Second Amendment rights.
Hmm.
Right? So it's not hard. It's not expensive
Mm-hmm.
unless you choose to make it and buy some fancy mask, right? Everyone can figure it out. And even people that can't afford to buy them, there are so many places you can get them for free.
Mm-hmm.
So I think from that perspective, if it's going to help for the people that absolutely refuse and are 100% against it on principle, whether or not it helps or not, then maybe it's the right call. Am
Mm-hmm.
I sad that that's where we are?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I don't think it should have to be that.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a sad state of affairs that that's where we are.
Mm.
But if that's what makes a difference, then that's what makes a difference. And I
Yeah.
think none of us knows enough to know. And so, why would you not err on the side of caution, right?
Yeah. Interesting. As a small business owner, do you understand? I hear more and more stories about people leaving California for other states. Is that something that that's affected you as well as a small business owner?
It's definitely affected us. It's definitely something that we talk about as a family. About, is it even a viable option for us? Could we figure it out? And so it's a conversation you have to have when you start adding up fees and taxes that go, beyond federal income tax and state income tax and property taxes. When you start adding in all the small business fees that are unique to California in terms of their size and scope, California is definitely one of the most unfriendly states for businesses. And I think that now, I think California and its industry and its a number of businesses will look drastically different in 5 years.
5 years.
I think COVID will do irreparable damage to the state of California and how it's able to keep businesses. I mean, and I'll use Disney as my example. I guarantee you, with Disney World being open in Florida and having figured out incredible protocols to keep people safe and having been doing that since the middle of July, the fact that Disneyland can't open under those same protocols and same restrictions is sadly, it's sad. And I think that the Walt Disney Company, who has so many different headquarters from finance to just so many departments that are down in the LA area, I think we will see whole swaths of the business move to headquarters in Florida.
Oh, wow.
I I mean, it's going to affect, I feel like it will affect thousands and thousands of people that will either have to choose to stay in LA and find a new job or relocate across the country.
I mean, with so many, I've been hearing this for years now, as a reporter, about companies leaving. You'd think that the state would either come to a point where they try to fix that somehow. I'm sure they don't want people flooding out. Do you think change is coming? I mean, what do you think?
I do think change is coming. I think that for a lot of people, it will not come fast enough and they will still leave. I think that if you look at what was on the ballot in terms of the ballot measures that were that sat on our ballot this election,
Mm-hmm.
and how we voted on them as a state, the fact that only 2 of them passed, I think speaks volumes to where the people are in terms of taxation, and how the state has gotten so good at hiding taxation in everything, right? I mean, it is ridiculous that our gas, so much of it is refined right up here in Northern California, is more than $1 more expensive than other areas of the country where it has to be sent. I mean,
Wow. What do
there's,
you think is one of the most friendly states and business friendly? I've heard a few, but I'm wondering what's the most that you think?
well, I don't know. Business friendly wise, I don't know. There are definitely a lot of businesses that have moved to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
A part of that, I think, especially tech companies, and they're all located outside the Austin area. One is for the talent pool, but the other is that the Austin area tends to be a more liberal leaning, outspoken area of Texas. And I think that the businesses look at this and they're like, well, if we're going to leave this area and we want our employees to come, we need to locate in a place where we feel like they won't feel so much like a complete fish out of water, right? It won't feel like foreign ground, which it's not. And I think people adjust to everywhere they go. And I think it's good for people to move around because it helps everyone change their perspective, right? Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, when you're suddenly walking a mile somewhere else, it gives you a different perspective. So I
That's
think it's
right.
a good thing.
That's Well, I was telling my kids when we were watching the shifts in the Electoral College on election night and the days following, I said, it's interesting because they said until World War II, most of the population had never been 50 miles from home. And after World War II, with being able to fly commercially and things like
Right.
that, people now travel. And now with remote work on the rise, I mean, so many people are leaving Silicon Valley and leaving some of these areas to go live wherever they've wanted to with their family, and they can still keep their jobs. So I said it'll be interesting to see in the next 10 to 20 years how the electoral map changes even more, because we're already starting to see it.
Right. I'm curious to see about the census results just for 2020, because so there are already a lot of people that have already left California in the past 2 to 3 years. I mean, you can just see it. Try and rent a U-Haul in the state of California to leave.
Really?
They're paying people to fly to places and just drive them back.
Wow. Is your husband
Because
from California?
he is born and raised.
Oh, I was going to say, I think for those of us who have been born and raised here, it's hard to think about leaving the
And
state.
not only, for him, he's even more of a libertarian than I am, like
Yeah.
definitely. And he grew up in a house where his dad was like a total, complete Democrat, 100%. He was a teamster, right? He was all in.
Your father-in-law?
My father-in-law,
Okay.
and now he's looking down at me because he passed away in February, going,
Oh.
don't tell them that, because literally the older he got, the more he watched these changes and was completely like, this is not the Democratic Party that I identified with. And I think that's the case of a lot of seniors. They cannot relate to AOC, right? That is not, they look at, like they were driving Packards and my last name is Studebaker, right? They were all about the American car. And they're like, what do you mean you want to get rid of fossil fuels? Are you insane? Right? I mean, it's a generational thing. And they just watched this party that they had identified with especially so many of them having blue collar jobs, become something different, whether right or wrong, they couldn't identify with it. And so my father-in-law, I mean, he was, when he died, like total Republican.
Oh, wow.
Very outspoken
Huh.
about the whole thing. I mean, and
It
so
almost seems like if somebody's political, they're political, and they can be both. They have seen both sides at
right.
times, and but there's still, yeah. If you've got that, you care or are political in your blood, you can almost be really strong on either side at times in your life. That's interesting. Yeah.
And I wonder what it'll mean for our kids. You know, our kids are being raised in a very political time. You know, where especially as teens, they're kind of afraid to speak out about their views, depending on where they live. And they're afraid to speak out about their views because, as I've explained to my children, anything you put out there on social media is going to come back to haunt you when you apply for a job. So you better make sure that you are always putting your best foot forward. And it is okay to express an opinion as long as you do it in a respectful and informed way. Don't be a lemming and just follow the crowd, right? Inform yourself, arm yourself with the truth to the best of your ability. And that is not easy these days at all.
Yeah.
You know, because they're like, well, where do you go for the truth? And I'm like, well, that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
The best you can do is read both sides and figure out where you fall. What sits right with your gut. And that's, I mean, you know, if you follow your gut, you know, if you hope that you've raised your children right, then hopefully their gut will take them in the right direction.
That's great. Yeah. Well, I'm going to keep you on. I was going to end the recording unless there's anything else you want to share for our talk show.
No, I just, you know, like I said, I think that it's important for us to realize that people are not one-dimensional, right? We are all not flat Stanley. You cannot flip us over and there's no definition of who we are on the back of our picture, right?
Yes.
With a rubber stamp that says, because you said this, you must be this. And so I think it's important to realize that because you identify as one thing, it doesn't make you something else, right? I can identify with Catholic and say that I am personally pro-life without wanting to politically change where we are as a nation. Does that make sense? I don't feel the need to force my opinions on someone else. But just in the same, someone shouldn't assume because I say that I'm Catholic and I'm pro-life that I want to force my opinions on their own decisions, right? And so I think that it's important to realize that people are multidimensional, faceted human beings, and they don't fall into a certain mold. And by listening more than you talk, which I feel like today has not been the day for that. I feel like all I've done is talk.
Hey, you're on the platform today.
I feel like we have the opportunity to learn and grow and walk a mile in someone else's shoes.
Oh, well, I'm inspired, honestly, and I appreciate you just being so honest and sharing kind of the complexities that go behind a lot of this. That I think, to your question, I think the problem, a lot of it is we are such a quick, fast-paced society. We do see these little bullet points. We get news article headlines only flash across social media, and it makes an impact. And it makes us not really, we see things, a lot of people see things on a little, like a quick surface level. We need to go deeper. And the challenge of how to do that when, you know, reading and just taking our time in this fast-paced society is sadly one of our bigger challenges is to keep up, you know, keeping our kids reading. So, all right, I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, no, but you stay on. Okay.